Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, "Give us the tools, we'll do the job." And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
Mr. Secretary, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posted about an hour ago, conveniently timed for this press conference, a video talking about U.S. pause on some weapons to Israel, and said you assured him last week that U.S. is working to remove those bottlenecks. Is this an accurate characterization of what you told him? If not, what did you tell him? Will the U.S. remove its holds on these bombs? And finally, have the ceasefire negotiators made any progress since last week? Are you more or less optimistic today about the prospects of a deal?
And I didn't quite hear your answer to my colleague's question here on Israel. Is Prime Minister Netanyahu's characterization, is it true, what he said about that what you assured him last week?
Right. So, today, what happened today completely exposes Antony Blinken and his so-called impartial role. I've always said that America in general is not an honest broker of Middle East peace, and Antony Blinken is definitely not. I am doubtful whether this guy doesn't have any assets or any other interest in Israel. But what happened today completely exposes him. He has nowhere to go. So what happened? He was holding a press conference, joint press conference with the Secretary General of NATO. And then he invited questions from those reporters present there. The first question came from Humaira, who you and I have always seen asking questions in the daily State Department press briefing. She asked the questions, and one of her questions was the video message that war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu released just before the press conference.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, "Give us the tools, we'll do the job." And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
So what Humaira was asking, that look, Benjamin Netanyahu releasing that video just before the press conference could not have been pure coincidental, because that video of Netanyahu is incriminating. What Netanyahu is saying is that a week ago, Antony Blinken was in Israel, and even though there is a kind of ban on lethal weapons being supplied to Israel from America, Antony Blinken, according to war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu, assured him that he is working day and night to ensure that no bottlenecks exist, and America is able to supply all kinds of weapons to Netanyahu and his rogue regime. And Netanyahu finishes his video by saying that you give us the tool and we'll finish the job, i.e. we will annihilate every single innocent, unarmed Palestinian. As if he is not satisfied by killing more than 40,000 people, with 28,000 of them being women, children, and babies. As if that is not enough. So that was the context of Humaira's question.
Thank you, Matt. Mr. Secretary General, I'm very glad you like numbers. I have a number of questions in true Washington fashion, multi-part questions that Secretary Blinken is particularly fond of.
Number 1 is a very good number.
Let me start with Gaza, and I'll turn to NATO. Mr. Secretary, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posted about an hour ago, conveniently timed for this press conference, a video talking about U.S. pause on some weapons to Israel, and said you assured him last week that U.S. is working to remove those bottlenecks. Is this an accurate characterization of what you told him? If not, what did you tell him? Will the U.S. remove its holds on these bombs? And finally, have the ceasefire negotiators made any progress since last week? Are you more or less optimistic today about the prospects of a deal?
Thanks, Mara. So on the questions regarding Israel and Gaza, first, it's very important to remember that our security relationship with Israel goes well beyond Gaza. Israel is facing a multiplicity of threats and challenges, including in the north from Hezbollah, from Iran, from the Houthis in the Red Sea, from various groups that are aligned against Israel and in many cases beholden to Iran. So the President's been very clear from day one that he will do everything he can to make sure that Israel has what it needs to effectively defend itself against these threats. And a big part of that as well is making sure that in providing that assistance to Israel, it has a strong deterrent, which is the best way to avoid more conflict, to avoid more war, to avoid what we're already seeing in Gaza spreading to other areas, to other fronts. That's been one of our objectives from day one. So we're committed to that. We, as you know, are continuing to review one shipment that President Biden has talked about with regard to 2,000-pound bombs because of our concerns about their use in a densely populated area like Rafah. That remains under review. But everything else is moving as it normally would move. And again, with the perspective of making sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself against this multiplicity of challenges. With regard to the ceasefire negotiations, and you heard me talk about this at length during our trip, I'll just remind everyone once again that the entire world came together behind the proposal that President Biden laid out a few weeks ago. The entire world with one exception, and that was Hamas. Hamas came back with, after everyone else had said yes, including Israel, reconfirmed to me by Prime Minister Netanyahu when I was in Israel. Hamas came back with new conditions, new demands, including demands and conditions that actually went beyond what it had already previously accepted. So we're working to see if we can bridge the gaps that Hamas has now created by not saying yes to the proposal that everyone else had agreed to, that was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council, countries around the world. And we have the negotiators, the mediators, Egypt, Qatar in particular, working on this to see if we can bridge the gap. As I've said before, and I'll repeat again based on what we've seen in recent days, I believe that the gaps are bridgeable, but that doesn't mean they will be bridged because ultimately Hamas has to decide. And it could decide again to continue to move the goalposts, to move the line out. If it continues to do that, the net result will be that people will continue to suffer horrifically every single day. And you have to question whether one individual living, we believe, hundreds of feet underground, relatively safe, is putting his own interests and his own views ahead of the interests, the needs of the people that he purports to represent. There could be a ceasefire right now if they had said yes a week ago. So we'll continue to work this with urgency, with determination, to see if we can bridge the gap. But I can't tell you with conviction that we will because, again, you have Hamas that continues to move the line.
Now what happens? Antony Blinken, being Antony Blinken, he answers everything but does not answer the specific question whether he made that promise to Benjamin Netanyahu. And the format of press conference being that you cannot ask a follow-up question, so Humaira did not ask the follow-up question as to why Blinken did not answer her specific question on his promise to Benjamin Netanyahu. Because that's crucial, right? Because if what Netanyahu is saying is true, that means that Blinken's posturing in the recent days, like going and enjoying the hospitalities of Arab countries and saying that how he's concerned about rebuilding Gaza, is not true. It's not true, because on one hand, you cannot be promising Israel to break all the bottlenecks and supply all kind of lethal weapons, including 2,000-pound bombs, to kill more and more Gazans and Palestinians. And on the other hand, you're saying that you're concerned about achieving peace process and ceasefire and rebuilding Gaza. These two things can't be true. Because in the same press conference, Antony Blinken again repeats that all the sufferings of Palestinians will end now if Hamas accepts the peace process. The second question was from BBC's Tom Bateman. You and I have seen regularly asking difficult questions in the daily State Department press conference. He asked the second question, again asking Blinken about the sufferings of innocent civilians, and he actually makes a special reference to their families who have lost everybody in their clan. One of them having lost 73 members. So he asked that question. Again, Blinken gives one of the worst acting performances of his life. I mean, that shows that what a pathetic actor he is. He tries to sound so concerned about the sufferings of Gazans. And then in the same vein, he warns Palestinians that your sufferings will continue or even increase if Hamas doesn't accept the peace process. I've said that if shamelessness has a face, today it was there in the press conference in the shape of Antony Blinken.
Tom Bateman with BBC.
And Mr. Secretary of State, Amos Hochstein has been in the region over the last few days in the Middle East. Can you report any progress on de-escalating tensions between Israel and Hezbollah? And on Gaza, an investigation by the Associated Press this week identified 60 Palestinian families in which at least 25 members have been killed, some of them involving 4 generations of the same family, many with more than 50 family members killed, and in one, 173 family members were killed. And I'm interested to understand that for Palestinians who hear what you say about a continuing conflict for just cause, but to them this feels like a war that seeks to destroy Palestinian society, what do you say to those people? How do you reconcile those views and those positions? Thank you.
On Lebanon, so as I mentioned earlier, one of our objectives from day one, since October 7th, has been to prevent this conflict from spreading, including in the north. And as you mentioned, Ms. Hochstein is in Lebanon, in the region, working on this. We've all collectively been working on this for many months and intensely. Again, in recent weeks, no one wants escalation. No one wants to see the conflict spread. And one of the paradoxes I think we have in this moment is I don't think any of the potential belligerents actually want to see a war or conflict spread. I don't believe Israel does. I don't believe Hezbollah does. Lebanon certainly doesn't, because it would suffer the most. I don't believe that Iran does. And yet, you have momentum potentially in that direction, because with the back and forth that goes on every day, there is always the possibility of miscalculation, of one side not fully seeing what the other is doing. And it's very important to do everything we can to arrest that and to find a diplomatic resolution to the challenge that exists for Israel, as well as for Lebanon. In Israel, there are something like 60 or 70,000 Israelis who've been forced from their homes. They've basically depopulated a big part of northern Israel because of the threat from Hezbollah, because of Hezbollah launching rockets into Israel and making life impossible. There are many Lebanese in southern Lebanon who are also not able to live in their homes and live in their towns. So we're working diplomatically to find a resolution to this so that people on both sides of the line have the confidence to be able to live in their homes and go back to where they live. Now, here again, so much of this comes back to the ceasefire. The most immediate way to empower our diplomacy and to be able to reach an agreement that allows people to return to their homes and live in security would be through a ceasefire in Gaza, because Hezbollah has tied the actions that it's committing against Israel to Gaza. So if we get that ceasefire, I think that will make it more likely that we can find a diplomatic resolution to the crisis in the north. With regard to Palestinian families that you discussed, on a human level, the suffering of little children, men, women, is horrific. And we see it every single day. People who are caught in a crossfire of Hamas's making as a result of a war that Hamas started are suffering every single day. And for all of us, this is a profoundly human tragedy. I've met with Palestinian Americans who've lost multiple members of their own families in Gaza, who shared with me the pictures of a little niece, a little nephew, a brother, a sister, a parent, a grandparent, who's been killed in the months since October 7th. And it's profoundly motivating in the wake of this suffering to want to do everything we possibly can to bring this to an end. The fastest way to do that, and this has been the case now for weeks, for months, is through the ceasefire that we've been working to achieve. And the biggest obstacle to achieving that ceasefire, again, remains Hamas and remains the decisions of perhaps one man who is, we believe, hundreds of feet underground in relative safety, while the people he purports to represent are suffering every single day. So we have to, all of us, put the interests of these many, many innocent families and people first and foremost. And that means that Israel has to do more, continue to do much more, to protect civilians, to make sure that they get the assistance they need. But it first and foremost means that Hamas has to make a decision. Is it actually looking out for the interests of Palestinian people? Is it looking out for its own interests at the expense of the interests of Palestinians who are suffering every single minute in Gaza? Fastest way to bring this to a conclusion tomorrow is through this ceasefire. That's what we're looking to achieve.
Can I just follow up just on the point about crossfire, because many of these deaths were in airstrikes, and by definition, there is no Palestinian air defense, so this is not crossfire. And yet I heard used that description before, so I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, look, on that, again, we've been on this as well from day one in trying to press Israel to do everything it can to avoid civilian casualties, to put a greater premium on civilian protection. And yes, we see that we see this too. It's without justifying any particular airstrike, and certainly we've ourselves reported as a government, as the State Department, on numerous incidents where civilians have been killed or grievously injured, including through airstrikes. But as we've also said, this terrain is extraordinarily difficult, maybe uniquely difficult, because again, you have Hamas that not only is hiding deep underground in tunnels while the people it purports to represent are not, it's also hiding in apartment buildings, hospitals, schools, using those as places to plot, to plan, to protect itself. But that means also that it's endangering thousands, tens of thousands of children, women, and men. It launched this war on November 7th. It conducts it in a way by retreating to places where it's hiding behind civilians that further endanger civilians. And it has not made the decisions necessary to stop it, which it could do right now.
And then the last question was by another reporter who refers back to Humaira's question. I mean, I salute to that reporter who refers back to Humaira's question and said that you did not answer Humaira's question about your so-called promise to Netanyahu. And then what he said, that wait, whatever I had to say, I have said that. At that point, Humaira intervenes and said, no, actually, you haven't. So it becomes a quite ludicrous moment for Antony Blinken, quite embarrassing moment for him.
The final question goes to Anders Figard with NRT.
And I didn't quite hear your answer to my colleague's question here on Israel. Is Netanyahu's, Prime Minister Netanyahu's characterization, is it true, what he said about that you, what you assured him last week?
With regard to the last question on Israel, I stand by exactly what I said a few minutes ago. Thank you.
Is Mr. Netanyahu telling the truth or not, Mr. Secretary?
Again, I've been I've been as clear as I can possibly be.
You assured him that these bottlenecks will.
I'm not going to talk about what we said in diplomatic conversations. I can just say again that we have a commitment to make sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself against a whole variety of threats. Gaza is part of it, but it far surpasses Gaza in terms of the threats they face. The President's committed to that. We continue to move these different cases through our system on regular order. We have one case that the President's talked about publicly, about the 2,000-pound bombs and concerns that we have about them being used in densely populated areas. That remains. We continue to work through that, but there's been no change in our posture, which our posture is, again, to make sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself across these many threats. Many of the systems that are moving through our system are ones that have been on order for, in some cases, years. It takes a long time to move these things, and a number of the things that are going to Israel won't get there for years. That is the nature of the way this works, but it's regular order, with the exception of that one system that we've talked about many times in public.
And then he's forced to give a longer explanation, but again, he doesn't talk about his promise to Netanyahu. So clearly, that shows that his refusal to answer a pointed question, I mean, it could have been simple. Did you make a promise or did you not make a promise? If you did not make a promise, again, say that. If you made a promise, say that. But accepting that he made a promise to Netanyahu behind the doors about removing all the bottlenecks and supplying more and more lethal weapons to the rogue regime so that they could kill more and more innocent civilians in Gaza and West Bank, would completely and officially expose Blinken. I mean, you and I know, many of you and I are absolutely convinced that this guy cannot be trusted. But him admitting that what Netanyahu is saying is true will be a formal confirmation that this guy cannot be trusted. He is not an honest broker of peace. America is definitely not an honest broker, and having Blinken as the face to negotiate peace process, I mean, I can totally understand why Hamas fighters have been reluctant in reciprocating the ceasefire offer, because America cannot be trusted when you have a Zionist like Blinken, who is so dishonest as well, who says one thing publicly and says another thing behind the doors to Netanyahu. How can you trust him? So this video, today's development, is absolutely crucial. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. And if you haven't pressed the notification button, which is the bell icon button, please do so now, so that next time when I upload new video, you get the alert straight away. God bless you all.